Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Like all sleepovers, it began with one. I was 13 at the time, not exactly a child, but also not quite an independent adolescent. That strange transitional period when spending the night at a friend's place still felt like the height of independence. It was late fall, not cold enough to keep the windows closed all the way, but cool enough that you needed a blanket. I was a resident of Riverview Heights, a less settlement tucked away on the outskirts of a vast pine forest. Furthermore, it wasn't the type of location where odd things occurred. That's what we believed. Anyway, my friend Daniel asked me, and two other men, Eli and Sean, to stay over at his house that Friday night. His split-level home was located in the woods at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac. Porch lights in the area were always flickering on at 7 p.m. and everyone, whether or not they knew you, waved. Daniel's older brother was away at college, and his mother worked the night shift at the hospital. That implied that we owned the house, which meant mayhem. We spent hours playing Xbox in Daniel's room, laughing foolishly at pointless YouTube videos, hurling chips at one another, and blasting Mountain Dew. His double bed, a desk, and a jumble of sleeping bags we spread down on the carpet took up the little room. Daniel laughed when Eli, who was resting closest to the wall, said, "Dude, where's my blanket?" We had all just made our beds and turned down the lights. "Look behind your back. You most likely kicked it." Eli sat up after rustling about. We all checked and said, "No, I swear it was right here. Not a blanket." It was amusing at first. It was Eli who was forgetful. He once attempted to use a straw to charge his phone, but we checked the hallway, under the bed, and under the desk. Nothing. We continued after Daniel offered him an extra throw blanket from the linen closet. Sean sat up in the middle of a try not to laugh video. All right, not amusing. What on earth happened to my blanket? Neither of us was laughing, nor was he. "I take it you're playing tricks on us?" I inquired. "No, man. It was simply here, really. It was being used by me." The overhead light was switched on by Daniel. The room felt as though a frigid sheet had been dropped on it. We all fell silent once more. We looked more furiously this time. I even looked at the guest room below and the laundry area. Space. Nothing. A pair of blankets. Lost. In the locked room in a locked house. Sadie, Daniel's golden retriever, hadn't even entered the room during the night. We thought she was asleep, as usual. She was in the living room with her nose beneath the couch. So, who the hell took the blankets? "I don't like this," Eli murmured. Daniel made an effort to lighten the tone by saying, "This feels like some paranormal activity stuff. Come on, guys. It's most likely a practical joke." He called his brother, who lives not far away and might have arrived home without saying anything. Voicemail. We made an effort to resume our hangout, but nobody was actually laughing anymore. We ultimately made the decision to go to the kitchen and reheat pizza rolls. We were gone for perhaps 20 minutes. Sean got rigid when we returned. Not at all. Not at all. Absolutely not. He had lost his entire sleeping bag. The sleeping bag, not just the blanket. We were motionless as we stood, and we were all looking at the vacant area on the floor, as if it were a murder scene. There was no sense about it. All of us were upstairs. Every one of us. No footsteps were heard. Nobody noticed anything. Then I became aware of something. A ripped piece of grey fleece material was visible beneath Daniel's bed. "Hey," I said. "There's something under there," I said, squatted and grabbed for it. I noticed a rustling sound as soon as my fingertips touched it, like someone moving quickly across plastic. My heart stopped beating. I felt chilled. Leaning closer, I thought perhaps the blanket was rolled up beneath the frame. However, eyes were present, eyes in the dark, staring back at me. I let out a yell. The others did the same. In utterly foolish fear, we pushed one another as we ran out of the room. Daniel locked the bedroom door after slamming it. We're all trembling and gasping in the corridor. Sean yelled, "What the hell was that? Who the hell was that?" "I thought that was your dog," Eli screamed. Pale as a ghost, Daniel shook his head. "The couch has couches," I said, shaking. I saw eyes. "She hasn't moved all night." We didn't return to that chamber. Human eyes, not animal. Human, with the lights on. We slept in the living room after dragging our sleeping bags downstairs. For the first time all night, Sadie curled up next to us, but it was made worse by the way she kept her eyes on the corridor. Actually, we didn't sleep. Not at all. Around 3 in the morning, Sadie got to her feet, and she raised her hackles and began to snarl low and guttural. Her gaze was fixed on the dim corridor leading back to the bedrooms. Then she gave a piercing, loud bark. There was a creak, perhaps floorboards. We took anything we could find after Daniel whispered, "Someone's in the house." A Nerf bat, broomsticks, and even a fireplace poker. And we waited until daybreak while sitting there frightened and armed. Around 7 a.m., Daniel's mother arrived home, and we told her everything. She didn't laugh, didn't say we were hallucinating things. She believed us straight away. Then she noticed the footprints in the mud. They started at the hallway window, just slightly cracked open, and led toward Daniel's room. She made a police call. They looked on the top of the house to bottom. Nothing. It was most likely an animal, they said. A hoax, perhaps. It's possible that one of us tugged the blankets around while we were asleep. We knew that was BS. Daniel gave me a call a week later. He made a noise. He added, "They found someone in the attic." My chest constricted. Perhaps months had passed since the man had moved up there. They believe he simply lingered after entering through the crawl space beneath the deck. He would come down at night and steal blankets, food, or anything else. Wrappers, empty water bottles, some of our old clothing, and even items from our backpacks were discovered by the police. I couldn't speak. Daniel added that he had a knife, a hunting knife. Up there, they discovered it. The man turned out to be a frogger. That's the term for those who reside in someone else's house covertly, move around when you're not there or asleep, and hide in crawl spaces, attics, and basements. They wait, observe, and occasionally do worse. According to the police, we were fortunate that he didn't hear us. However, we all recalled that night, that moment beneath the bed, and that stare. The worst part is that he was most likely present while we joked, laughed, played video games, slept on the floor, and went about barefoot. He was most likely observing from beneath the bed the entire time. We didn't return to Daniel's. The following summer, he relocated. His mother was unable to handle it, unable to reside there in light of what had transpired. There was only a panel in the hallway ceiling for the attic entry. One hand might be used to lift it. Furthermore, I don't recall the games, pizza rolls, or jokes from that evening. I recall hearing breathing just behind the wall, as well as the black eyes. I was never the paranoid one. When he went down those late-night YouTube rabbit holes, involving break-ins or cartel kidnappings, it was always Trevor or possibly Brandon. Me. It was me who urged everyone to relax. It wasn't that crazy in the world, that the majority of humans weren't monsters, that such incidents weren't random. That was prior to the previous summer. We were all no longer children before the night. Like all our previous sleepovers, it began as usual. Actually, it's a tradition. Every summer since middle school, we've stayed up late watching horror films, eating junk food, and playing dumb games like Would You Rather or Would You Fight a Bear for $1 million. This time, it was at Caleb's house, a large one-story home on the outskirts of town in the Brookside Pines neighborhood. It sounded more fancy than it actually was. It's the kind of neighborhood where kids ride bikes at sunset and everyone waves, even if they don't know your name. It's primarily calm families with a few seniors. Caleb's parents were the type that would buy goodies from Costco and let us go as long as we didn't damage the place. His mother worked evenings as a nurse, and his father was a pilot who was frequently away on business. She departed that Friday at approximately 6:30 p.m. and staying up to late. Please, she winked at us, since she knew we would be late anyhow. That night, there were 5 of us: Eric, Trevor, Brandon, Isaac, Caleb, and me, of course. There was an unsaid feeling that, since we were all seniors now at 17, this might be one of the final genuine sleepovers before college, the workforce, or whatever else adulthood had in store. It was familiar, cozy, and felt normal until it wasn't. We had a sluggish start to the evening: pizza, Mountain Dew, a couple of Mortal Kombat games, and finally Caleb's enormous TV. Someone proposed flashlight tag outside at around 10, but we rejected the idea. Bugs that are too wet. Additionally, it was one of those evenings when the air seemed to be still. Heat pressed at the windows as if it wanted to enter, but there was no air. At about 11:15, the doorbell rang. Caleb appeared perplexed. "Are you guys anticipating anyone?" We weren't. He cracked the door after checking the peephole. "Oh, it's just my cousin Mason." We didn't know Mason at all. I think I'd seen him once or twice in the years. He was a few years our senior, perhaps 20. I've always been half sleepy. Half his smirking expression made it hard to determine if he was judging you or bored. "Yo," Mason remarked nonchalantly as he walked into the living room, if he were the owner. "You guys had pizza, I heard." Caleb chuckled uncomfortably. "Yes, we did keep some slices." Mason didn't inquire. He simply snatched up a paper plate and began stacking slices as we uncomfortably stopped the film. Although he wasn't particularly impolite, it was obvious that he wasn't there to socialize with us. I nodded when Brandon whispered to me, "This guy gives me weird vibes. He's simply older, likely under the influence of drugs." Mason was only there for around 40 minutes. He ate half of the leftovers, fiddled with his phone, made a comment about getting together later, and then went. Caleb appeared unfazed, stated that when things were difficult at home, Mason would occasionally crash there. He had a key, and his parents were out of town. Yes, it was strange, but not yet alarmingly so. By midnight, we had finally made our peace. We spread the couch cushions and sleeping bags over the living room when Caleb got them out. The kitchen light remained on in the backdrop to keep us from being completely black, but it was still dim. Before we fell asleep, everyone was half drowsy, cracking stupid jokes to get someone to snort. Approximately 1:20 a.m. I stirred, not from a nightmare, but from a sound, a gentle thump that resembles the opening of the kitchen sliding glass door. In the dark, my heart thumping, I blinked. My initial thought was that Caleb was getting a snack. However, when I turned over, I discovered him soundly asleep, wrapped up in his sleeping bag beside the couch. I heard voices at that point, 2 of them, low and muted. Then time paused and the lights came on. Both of the men were wearing black ski masks. Unlike the artificial guns used in movies, one of them carried a gun that appeared weighty, real, and chilly. While pointing it at us, he yelled, "Get up, don't move." Hands where I can see them froze. Before my brain could react, my body did. Heart exploding in my chest, arms jerking up. Caleb was sitting up looking dazed and disoriented. As I recall, Eric repeatedly whispered, "Oh my God." As Brandon gasped, a duffel bag was carried by the second man. He began to yell commands. Now we obeyed, not because we were brave, but because that gun was aimed at us, and the guy holding it looked like he'd pulled a trigger before. Trevor dropped his phone too quickly, causing it to clatter over the floor. The items in the center were watches, wallets, and phones. The man with the mask pointed the gun at him and cursed. "Do it again, and I swear." No, I'm sorry," Trevor said. "You think this is funny?" He was trembling. All of us were. The second guy dumped everything out of Eric's backpack after rifling through it. He even carried a bottle of half-used cologne in his pocket, like they had done before. It was disorderly and violent in a subdued manner. Then my blood ran colder than anything else because of anything that transpired. Caleb glanced back, but the man with the rifle only turned slightly, calm, not afraid, terrified. Even if their brief eye contact was brief, it was sufficient. I didn't say anything at first. I told myself I dreamed it, but then I observed something else. They weren't even touching Caleb's belongings. His phone was still on the arm of the couch, his wallet partly out of his backpack, undamaged. Even his fancy Jordans outside the door, they didn't go near them. I didn't know what to think until the guy with the duffel suddenly fired a gun into the ceiling. It was a loud boom. Plaster fell down in a cloud. Trevor let out a yell. Brandon balled himself up. Eric sat still. What about Caleb? As if anticipating it. Caleb flinched a second too late. The man with the mask yelled, "Stop talking. The next one won't miss." After gathering our belongings, including phones, chargers, a Nintendo Switch, and even some Bluetooth speakers, we ran out the door and vanished into the darkness. We remained there for a while, listening and breathing, hoping for another shot, but it never came. We didn't contact the police straight away. Caleb tried to seem astonished, saying he had no idea who they were, that they must have broken in, and that we were lucky to be alive, but we weren't buying it after what we saw. Caleb called our parents, who arrived in a rage and with questions. Caleb denied everything. "Screw you, man." Brandon continued slowly. "Your cousin was here earlier, and then all of a sudden, masked men appeared. That's a crazy coincidence." Trevor pointed to the unworn Jordans and said, "Why didn't they take those? They're worth it." He was sweating, but not out of fear, but out of guilt. Eric remained silent, staring at Caleb if he had never seen him before, and I eventually asked the question that no one else dared to ask. "Did you know?" Caleb didn't respond. That stillness was more deafening than any gunshot. Later that week, we learned that Mason had a criminal history, including petty stealing, breaking and entering, and several prior arrests. Our parents didn't want us embroiled in legal trouble, so the police were never involved in our ordeal. They offered justifications, claiming that the boys must have been lucky and that Mason might not have been involved, but we knew better. 2 months later, Caleb changed schools, and we never heard from him again. I still occasionally wake up at 1:20 a.m., hear the door slide open, and feel the gun pointing at my chest after moving in with some relatives across the state. However, the betrayal, it wasn't just a robbery, haunts me more than the fear. The worst type of monster isn't the one who breaks into your house. It's the one who lets them in and watches you suffer. It began with a sleepover and was made by someone we trusted, laughed with, played video games with, and grew up with. Just 4 girls, an old house, and a borrowed camera, nothing out of the ordinary. But when something is watching from the shadows, when it's already in the frame before anybody realizes they never unlock the door, things like this don't remain simple. Things like this don't remain simple. I was 13 when it happened. My best friend at the time, Callie Rodas, invited me and 2 other girls, Harper and June, for a sleepover at her place one Friday night. It was one of those large old houses on the outskirts of a tiny town called Ashmill, the kind that cacks like it's stretching in its sleep, and her family had moved there from somewhere upstate the year before. It was the kind of 13 where you still call your parents mommy when you're scared, but you're trying really hard not to. The attic was strange, but not in a bad way. It had slanted ceilings, old wood floors that creaked when you walked on them, and one of those small round windows at the far end. We all thought it was cool that she had an entire attic all to herself, since no one else we knew had that. It was always a little cold up there. Know we'd been there before, played truth or dare, whispered about crushs, and played prank calls on boys we didn't even like. But this night felt different because Callie had covered the floor with sleeping bags and pillows, strung up fairy lights, and brought up an old box TV and DVD player to make it feel more like a teen hangout than a dusty storage space. She had an older brother, Ryan, but he was at his friend's house, so it was just the 2 of us, the attic, and a few hours to kill. Callie's mom made us pizza from scratch, and her dad was out of town for work, so we had the place mostly to ourselves. I'm still not sure if that's because of what happened, or if something inside of me knew something was wrong from the moment I walked through their front door. Was always discovering strange things in that house. A few weeks prior, she had claimed to have discovered a cache of old letters in one of those music boxes with the spinning ballerina in the crawl space, but the ballerina was headless. That type of house. However, that evening, she informed us that she had discovered our father's old camera. She tossed it into the stack of blankets between us and said, "I found it in a box under the attic stairs. Still works. Want to mess around with it?" Of course we did. It was a silver Sony Cybershot, the type from the early 2000s, with that tiny digital screen on the back and a big flash that made everything look washed out. The flash was ridiculous, overexposing everything so much that it looked like we were glowing ghosts. But that only added to the fun. We were 13, bored, and high on orange soda and pop rocks. So we took pictures of each other, making dumb faces and posing as supermodels, vampires, witches, or anything else we could think of. I was challenged by Callie to go down into the basement by myself and snap a picture without any lighting. After 3 steps, I gave up. Instead, Harper and June joined me, and after taking a few hazy pictures by the ancient washing machine, we fled in terror when we heard a thump coming from the upper floor. We thought it was either the cat or the pipes. Callie's relatives own this ancient Buttons, a grey cat, moved like smoke. After laughing it off, we hurried back upstairs and slept down in the attic once more. We were all bundled in sleeping blankets around midnight when Callie began looking through the camera's pictures. As usual, we huddled around her to make fun of our ridiculous positions, while pointing and making fun of one another until she stopped. She merely scowled and tapped back one at first without saying anything. "Picture. Then send it again." "Wait," she said. June peered over her shoulder and asked, "Who's that?" "What do you mean?" "We're in the living room there." "Yes, but take a look." Callie angled the camera in our direction. It was an image of Harper, June, and I feigning levity in front of the couch, with our mouths open and our arms lifted, as if we were doing magic. However, a tall, male person with a pale complexion and dark clothing was standing just beyond the hallway door, behind us. Harper answered slowly, "I don't remember anyone being behind us. I thought we were alone." My mouth started to dry up. "It might be Ryan. Perhaps he arrived home early," Callie said. "No, an hour ago. He sent me an SMS. He's going to stay." Once more, she pressed the button. The man was closer in the following picture, now standing right behind Harper's shoulder in the kitchen doorway. His eyes were staring straight at the camera, but his face remained expressionless and lifeless. June, she pulled her sleeping bag up to her chin with a gasp. "Isn't this some sort of prank? As if you made changes to these or something." I said, "It's a digital camera. It's not possible to just Photoshop such things. Not on the camera." As Callie scrolled once more, her palm began to shake. One more image. June and I were on the floor acting like we were wrestling. Harper is hurling a pillow at both him and us. He trailed me by only a few steps. He extended his hand. He may have been an inch from my shoulder with his fingertips. Bile rose up in my throat. A whisper. "He was that close," I said. "We would have heard him," Callie remarked, her voice shaking. "How did we not see him?" The panic didn't strike all at once. "He was right behind you." The room seemed to be gradually growing heavier. Our minds were attempting to deny its reality. However, those photos were clear and sharp. He was present. He was present. June hurried up and said, "I'm getting Mom." Callie took hold of her arm instead. "They'll claim it's phony or something. Let's check the house now, please." At that point, I was aware of her fear. Callie was never interested in doing her own checks. When we watched terrifying movies, she would normally send her brother to the basement, but this time she picked up a broom and led the way down the stairs. We switched on every light in the house and searched the garage, under shower curtains, and beneath mattresses. The rear door was secured. Every window was secured. "No," Harper murmured. "He just walked in and out without us noticing." "No." We eventually roused Callie's mother. When we showed her the pictures, She became much more scared than when she first saw our faces. She remained silent. Her lips were squeezed thin as her eyes flew over the screen. The following morning, Callie's father arrived home early and took the camera to verify the settings. We could all see it in his face, though. He didn't think it was only a glitch or lens flare. Not at all. However, the worst part followed. The pictures were gone when Callie returned to show them to her parents. Each and every one. All of the photos we took that evening were deleted. All of them were with him. But the older ones on the memory card were still there, removed. Nobody touched it. Callie cursed. Nothing was deleted by me. Her mother attempted to reassure us. I swear, old memory cards can occasionally become corrupt. Images are always being erased. However, it didn't seem corrupt. Something didn't seem to want us to remember it. In order to retrieve the files, we pleaded with Callie's father to take the camera to anybody, but he refused, claiming the card was too old and unstable. Also, it was meant to be. That was the end of it. Neither of us returned to the house. Callie began spending time with several schoolgirls. The following summer, Harper left. After several months, June stopped responding to texts. We didn't discuss it again, but I can still picture his face now, 30 years later. He seemed more at home there than we did, and he wasn't upset or depressed, as if we had strayed into his personal space rather than the other way around. In my life, I think I've recounted this story 3 times. Nobody ever accepts it. They claim it was a dream, that we staged the pictures, or that someone's father was playing tricks on us. However, I can still recall how I felt when I saw that final image. He was very close. How even though I hadn't felt anything at the moment, I could practically feel his breath on my neck. Something like that is not something you forget. You can't. In the first place, I had no desire to attend the sleepover, since everyone else has accepted the invitation, and you don't want to be the only one left out. You accepted it. The only one left out. You accepted it. For a week, the group had been discussing it. Over to Miles's house on Friday night. Junk food and movies. No parents. Miles was someone I didn't even know well. He was in a few of my classes and attended the same school. Always quiet and a little strange. Off, but not in a negative sense. The type of child who, while everyone else exchanged chips and discussed soccer, donned a hoodie even in the summer and wrote in a black notebook over lunch. However, my buddies Chris, Liam, Rosie, Aiden, and Jenna were leaving. I replied, yes. I was unaware that he would be having his first sleepover ever. Miles lived in one of those old 2-story homes with a wraparound porch and wooden steps, right out on the edge of Larkpa Lane. It appeared to be the type of place that had once been lovely, but had not been cherished for a long time. The front yard grass is half dead, the yellow porch light is flickering, and the paint surrounding the windows is flaking. His parents would not be present. They had left him alone with a list of emergency numbers and some cash for pizza, while they were in Vermont for the weekend on some sort of corporate retreat. In hindsight, that was most likely the first warning sign. With 6 other children, who leaves a 15-year-old alone for the whole weekend. Nevertheless, we all arrived. Naturally, Miles was wearing a black hoodie when he opened the door. He nodded slowly to each of us, hardly spoke, and opened the door for us. His living area was dark, lit only by a few table lamps. The drapes were drawn, a large bowl of popcorn, some off-brand drinks, and a stack of horror DVDs were placed next to a TV that appeared to be dusty. With a cool setup, Aiden said, letting his backpack fall. We all sort of settled in, with Jenna pulling a blanket over her lap, Rosie sprawling over the floor, Chris making loud jokes to break the strange silence, and me sitting on the end of the couch. Thanks, Miles said, standing stiffly at the window as if unsure of what to do next. The first movie was one of those campy 8 South slashers, with blood, screaming, and stupid teens getting lost in the woods. Miles never fully relaxed, always looking at the front door, and then at the hallway behind him, as if he was waiting for something. Helped diffuse the stress. We flung popcorn when someone jumped and laughed at the awful acting. For a moment, it seemed like a real sleepover, but the second movie, which was slower, was a black and white foreign film about a haunted house. Instead of sitting with us, Miles stood behind the couch and watched us instead of the movie. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I noticed Rosie move uneasily, and Chris looked back over his shoulder and said, "You good, man? This one's based on a true story," Aiden said, and Miles blinked slowly. "This one's based on a true story," he said, and when no one answered, he continued, his voice even but quiet. "You know, most people think ghosts make noise, but they just watch." We tried to ignore it and finish the movie, but the atmosphere had changed. The room felt colder, and nobody was really talking. "All right," Jenna muttered. "Thanks for that." Miles shrugged. "Just saying." It was only 10:45 when Rosie whispered something to Jenna, who simply shook her head and looked at the clock. Miles offered to show us the house after the second movie, but none of us were particularly interested in seeing more of it. Liam, being Liam, responded, "Sure, why not?" And everyone started to move. It was strange, and we followed Miles upstairs to his room, which smelled slightly of dust and clothes, with shelves, books, candles, and these strange little figures made of cloth and twine, some of which had button eyes lining the walls. Some were missing arms or legs, while others had none at all. "Did you make these?" Miles nodded, and Jenna asked, "Yeah, I used to make them when I couldn't sleep." Jenna forced a little laugh. "What are they meant to represent?" "People," he said. "Kind of." I made an effort to avoid fixing my eyes on them. One of them had red yarn sewn across its mouth, and although I thought it was facing one way when we entered, it was now turned slightly more in the direction of the door. He went into his closet. A tall, almost life-sized figure was slumped in an ancient wooden chair inside. It had a burlap sack near its face and was dressed in a long black robe. Where there should have been a mouth, a patch had been sewn. The hair wasn't yarn. It was real, brown, stringy, and dirty. "This is the Watcher," Miles said, smiling for the first time all night. "He sees everything," Rosie whispered. "Okay, I want to go back downstairs now." But Miles kept talking. "You shouldn't look into his eyes too long. He doesn't like it." "Doesn't even have eyes," Liam murmured. "He does under the sack." There was little conversation back in the main room. Silently, we sat, the third movie playing, while everyone glanced at the TV, but wasn't actually watching. I kept staring at the stairway, half expecting to see that doll thing standing there. Everyone eventually started to nod out. Aiden and Chris were out curled up in sleeping bags. Jenna and Rosie whispered quietly before settling down. I tried to close my eyes, but I couldn't quit thinking about the Watcher. It felt like something was still awake. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The TV had gone to a blank blue screen. The room was silent. Something felt odd. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. The living room was dark, but the hallway light was on. There was a form at the edge of it. I initially believed it to be Miles, but I was mistaken. It wore the same burlap sack near its head and the same robe the Watcher doll had been wearing, but it was taller and slimmer. I went cold. It remained still, with its head cocked slightly to one side. It simply stood there. I gently leaned out and nudged Aiden. He stirred, but remained unconscious. I turned to see that the hallway was deserted. I informed myself that I was dreaming. I must have been. I pulled the cover up to my chin and lay back down, my heart pounding. Then I heard the creak, though. Upstairs floorboards, followed by more and more, creeping above us like slow, determined footsteps. I wasn't the sole listener. With wide eyes, Rosie sat up. "Did you hear that?" she said in a whisper. Already awake, Jenna gripped her blanket tightly. Miles never returned to the lower level. The sound of footsteps ceased. Then, like a chair being dragged, we heard something move across the floor. Jenna desired to go. She said in a whisper that she was going to contact her father and get her suitcase. The lights went out when Chris informed her she was overreacting. Each and every one. The TV's blue glow disappeared, as did the hallway and the lamps. Complete darkness. Everyone let out a yell. We scurried to find our phones. I had died. Rosie's was, too. Aiden's refused to switch on. Jenna's turned off and flickered. Movement came from the stairway, quick as a running thing. Then it entered the space. I felt it. I swear to God. Chilly air, a hefty presence. Breathing, raspy and low. There was a scream. A person collided with the wall. I covered my head and ducked. Then nothing. Quiet. Miles, dressed normally, was standing in the hallway with a box of cereal when the lights flickered back on. He blinked as if he had just woken up and questioned, "What happened?" No one responded to the question. "Why are you all freaking out?" Rosie started crying. Chris urged him to stop talking. Aiden was trembling as he stood there. We went out, every one of us. We waited by the mailbox while Jenna texted her father from the street. The whole way home, no one spoke. I didn't return to Larkspur Lane. We didn't. After 2 weeks, Miles stopped attending school. It was reported that he moved. When nobody truly knew. I still dream about that hallway sometimes in the middle of the night. The burlap sack, the tall figure, and the way it cocked its head as if it could hear my thoughts. It wasn't a doll, which was the worst part. It was aware of my presence and had moved. It started the summer before 7th grade, back when I used to spend virtually every night with my best friend, Mia Thompson. We were neighbors on Oakage Drive, a peaceful middle-class neighborhood in a town called Fairhaven, Michigan. The kind of neighborhood where people still waved when they passed one another and youngsters rode bikes till the porch lights came on. I couldn't be separated from Mia. Our parents joked we must have been twins in a prior life. If I wasn't at her place, she was at mine. And throughout the summer, we basically lived at one another's residences. My house was not as old as hers. A tiny 2-story blue colonial with white shutters, aged hardwood floors, and a creaky staircase that made it tough to sneak about undetected. Upstairs in the front was her bedroom, which had 2 large windows looking out onto the street. When the house settled, the room creaked and muttered, but it seemed alive with character. I was always welcomed by her parents, Eric and Dana, who also allowed me to stay over any time I wanted. It like a second home to me. It began like any other Friday night in July. Shortly after lunch, I had come over with a plastic shopping bag full of snacks and an extra hoodie, and my sleeping bag under one arm. The area smelled faintly of someone frying hamburgers, and the air was thick with humidity. Mia smiled like if she had been waiting all morning to greet me at the door. She finally remarked, "I was about to walk down and drag you here." The house was cool inside, with the background hum of window conditioners. We went about our day as normal, chatting about our classmates, painting our nails, scrolling through TikTok and watching pointless YouTube videos. We had garlic bread and spaghetti for dinner. Her mother then brought out brownies that were still warm from the oven. The sky had turned from pink to dark purple by the time we made our way upstairs to her chamber. One by one, the street lights turned on, illuminating the street with a yellowish radiance. Under a blanket fort we built out of chairs and string lights. We stayed up watching a horror movie on her iPad. We would pause every few minutes to scream at the jump scares, and then laugh at how terrified we were. I recall seeing that the movie ended at 12:04 a.m. and everything changed at that point. After abruptly removing the blanket from her head and crawling to the window, Mia exclaimed, "Hey, look!" Still giggling from the movie's conclusion, I followed. However, I stopped when I saw her face tight-lipped and with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" I inquired. She pointed without responding. A man walked slowly along the sidewalk below, in the flickering orange streetlight. I didn't give it much thought at first. Sometimes, even at late hours, people took their pets on walks. However, this man was dogless. He didn't appear to be walking in any direction. He would go a few feet past a house, pause, turn around, and then walk back the opposite direction. He would do this repeatedly, as if he were waiting for someone or something. "Do you know him?" I murmured. Mia shook her head. "Never seen him before. He wasn't dressed like someone out for a jog or a walk. He donned a big dark hoodie with the hood up, even though it was at least 75 outside. He had baggy jeans and boots, and he kept his hands tucked in his front pocket. We watched in silence, pressing against the glass, our breath misting the window. He stopped pacing after a few minutes and simply stood there, surveying the area. Then he looked up directly at us, as if sensing our attention. Both of us ducked. Our heart was racing. Mia was whispering to me. I wished he hadn't noticed us. What the hell? What the hell? What the hell? Perhaps it was merely a coincidence. He might have been examining the house. However, we both knew somehow that was untrue. For a while, we sat silently on her room's floor, listening intently for any noise. After a few minutes, we chuckled uneasily as we attempted to get over our nervousness. I said, "He probably didn't see us," in an attempt to persuade us both. "Yeah," Mia replied. "Perhaps he's simply awaiting an Uber or stuff." However, I secretly didn't think that was true. Then there was a knock. 3 slow, purposeful knocks on the main door. We stopped. Mia didn't have a doorbell at her residence. Either you knocked or you didn't enter. Silently, we sat there, hoping it was all in our heads. There's another knock, louder this time. We wanted to be certain before waking her parents, who were sleeping down the hall. We made the foolish decision to slip downstairs and peer through the tiny window near the front entrance. No lights were switched on. Every sound made my stomach turn, including the creaking of the stairs beneath our feet. We knelt beside the door at the bottom and looked through the window. The man from the street was back. I could see his stiff, bent stance even though he was standing too near to the entrance and the hood obscured his face. After turning slightly as if sensing us, he gently turned to face us. Via the glass, he had a gaunt, pale face. His eyes were sunken and big. The expression in them, as if he were gazing through us and not seeing us, will always stick in my memory. Once more we ducked. "What on earth is going on?" With a trembling voice, Mia whispered. Then the hammering began. He repeatedly banged both fists into the glass. The door shook in its frame as a whole. We raced upstairs and yelled. The first person to awaken was Mia's father, shouting that someone was attempting to break in. We stormed into their room. The man was gone by the time he hurried downstairs. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. They drove around the neighborhood, looked in the porch, and searched the yard. However, the individual was nowhere to be seen. Nothing, no automobile close by, no footsteps. According to one of the cops, it was most likely a random wanderer who was intoxicated or under the influence. It didn't feel right, though. He glanced up at us twice. But why? Why did he knock rather than enter? For what reason did he stare, as if he was familiar with us? My parents came to fetch me up after I called them. That night, I didn't get any sleep. Neither did Mia. We continued texting till dawn. Even now, Mia and I still discuss that evening. Both of us are 23. She left that residence 2 years ago, and I now live in a different state. She said something to me a few months ago that I still can't forget. While looking through old family photos, she came upon one from her 7th birthday celebration. Cake, balloons, and her cousins and friends including myself, in a glittery top and blue shorts were all present. Additionally, in the backdrop, a man in a hoodie was standing close to the barrier, staring directly into the camera. Mia is adamant that nobody recalls inviting him. His identity is unknown to her parents. She used FaceTime to show me the photo. My blood froze. It was the same individual. Before we ever saw him pacing the street, he was there 4 years. I sometimes wonder what may have occurred if Mia's parents hadn't been home, if we had opened the door. And I wonder whether he's still watching and waiting outside. The sensation of the air that night is still vivid in my mind. Warm, still, and laden with the kind of silence that only becomes apparent when you're young and anticipating an exciting event. When I was 10, summer meant sleepovers that lasted until the first bird began to sing, endless days, and sticky popsicles. Almost every weekend, I would spend time at my cousin Liam's place. Every game of hide and seek felt like an adventure, since his place was different, bigger, older, and a touch creaky. His house had actual hiding places, unlike mine. There are antique closets, crawl spaces, attic stairs, and a basement with 3 distinct storage rooms. In contrast to my 2-bedroom flat, it felt like a palace. We didn't even have our own phones back then, let alone iPads or TikTok. We had to create it if we wanted to enjoy ourselves. The flashlight hidden sec was our favorite invention. The guidelines were straightforward. Each person is only permitted to have 1 flashlight. Each person is only permitted to have 1 flashlight. And the horror was always 5 minutes ahead. We believed we were courageous. We believed we were smart. However, we were still children pretending to play in a house that knew how to keep secrets. Liam's parents were cool all the time. His father was a traveling surveyor who occasionally traveled for 2 or 3 days. And his mother, Aunt Rachel, worked nights at the hospital. Both had attended a friend's anniversary celebration in Ocean View to towns over that evening. They intended to spend the night in a hotel close by. We were meant to be watched by Liam's older brother, Dean, who was 17 years old and rebellious in that bored teenage way. However, at approximately 9:00 p.m. Dean said, "Hey, I'm heading out for a bit. Don't be stupid. Don't burn the place down," as he leaned against the refrigerator as we were finishing our grilled cheese sandwiches. "I'm sleeping upstairs, in case anyone wants to know." "Nice." Liam continued to eat without even looking up. "Yes, anything." Dean acted without waiting for our approval. We heard the rear door close a minute later. It wasn't the first time. He had done it before. Liam enjoyed being alone in the house. No rules, more space. Dean enjoyed leaving. For both of them, the arrangement was ideal. As the visiting relative, I was also excluded from the discussion. Our game began in the customary manner. Rock, paper, scissors. I was the first to hide because I lost. Liam smiled and held his cheap blue lantern like a weapon as he said, 5 minutes. And this time, no attic. You are dishonest. I shot back. That was once. Already approaching the basement entrance on tiptoe. And you didn't even look for me. While I slipped upstairs, he counted in the dimly lit basement. Not just the first floor, but the second floor as well. The arrangement of Liam's house seemed strange, as if it had been constructed in parts throughout the years. There were 2 spare bedrooms, an additional living room, and a lengthy hallway on the second floor that usually had a slight dust and mothball odor. I hid in the end spare room, which was smaller. An ancient quilt was folded on a crate beside the wall, and there were 2 enormous beanbag seats beneath a dusty window. Excellent, with some breathing space left next to my nose. I pushed myself between the beanbags and covered myself with the blanket. The room's door was ajar, just a little. I reasoned that it would lessen Liam's suspicion. I just needed to wait and remain motionless. Something doesn't feel right. A couple of minutes went by. On the stairs, I heard creaking. Steps. I believed Liam was a sluggish, but self-assured person who no longer tried to be quiet. Most of it was muffled by the carpet, but I could still follow the movement. Then into the spare bedroom door and into the hallway. After pausing, the footsteps came into the room. Heart pounding. I remained motionless. I paid close attention. They crossed the room to the closet, whoever it was. The second closet opened, then the door, and then there was a pause. The drawers opened. I couldn't understand. It wasn't typical. Liam never rummaged around. He normally scanned with the flashlight and gave up if he didn't find me in 30 seconds. Then I heard it. The voice of Liam. He summoned a singing voice from somewhere upstairs. My heart fell. He was therefore not present in the room. He wasn't whatever he was. I hardly moved under the blanket, but my thoughts were screaming. I gradually raised the quilt's edge a little. There was no boy in the figure standing next to the desk. He was taller than Dean by far, wearing black slacks and a light hooded hoodie. She is easily over 6 feet tall. I could just make out the outline of his face. He froze and Liam said, "Closer now." He was approaching the room, silent, tight, like a predator waiting. The man, whomever he was, slipped back into the corner behind the stubby section of wall that protruded close to the closet. Liam took his flashlight and stepped into the doorway. He continued to shine the beam languidly throughout the room while playing the game. It passed over the beanbags' tops, I made the decision to go quickly, even though I wasn't sure if he spotted me. I pretended to lose and sat up. All right, you got me," I muttered, tossing the blanket aside as I laughed nervously. Liam smiled. "Took me long enough." I stood up, approached, and flung my arm over his shoulder nonchalantly. I led him out of the room, while pretending to laugh. "Let's get a snack or something," I announced. "Someone's in there," I muttered, leaning close as we reached the top of the stairs. "We must now walk outside." Liam's face turned white. He didn't dispute. We ran to the neighbor's house, going through the kitchen, out the back door, and directly across the yard. I don't recall knocking at all. Mrs. Halpin yanked us inside after opening the door and glancing at our faces. Everything we told her happened quickly. Without hesitation, she dialed 911. Within 6 minutes, the police arrived. They barged inside Liam's house, and we observed from the window of her living room. Sweeping with a flashlight, voices went up. They led a man out in handcuffs 5 minutes later. He wasn't the family's friend or neighbor. 2 days prior, he had been seen asking residents whether they were selling tools or scrap metal while strolling around the area. In his sweatshirt pocket, the police discovered a box cutter and screwdriver. Although he had no criminal history, I was troubled 4 years by the way he walked, the way he looked about the room, and the way he stood motionless. Liam had no desire to engage in hide and seek ever again, nor did I. A new security system was installed by his parents. In all honesty, Dean's summertime grounding felt like a minor penalty in comparison to what might have occurred. Even after all these years, I still find it impossible to sleep in a new home without first inspecting every closet and crevice. I am aware of how quickly childhood can change, how a single breath may transform enjoyment into fear. I sometimes think about that man and how composed he appeared, as if he had done this before and was waiting. And if Liam hadn't called my name, I wonder what may have happened. I've never enjoyed spending the night at someone else's house. I wasn't merely a homebody, as my mother said. It was the nighttime breathing of strange walls. How, particularly when I was meant to be sleeping, I couldn't quite trust the shadows. However, I made an exception for my best friend, Alex, that night when I was 13 years old. We had planned weeks in advance, and it was a Friday in late October, finally allowing him to remain up late. His father assured him that we would tour Luigi's mansion in full and consume enough pizza rolls to make us ill. In a small hamlet outside of Asheville, North Carolina, Alex lived on a peaceful street. It was the sort of place where there was a main road, a single gas station, and more flickering than illuminated streetlights. His home, which had been unoccupied for more than a year, was at the extreme end of a cul-de-sac and was only bordered by another house. Additionally, there was an overgrown field across the road that had likely not been mowed in 10 years. Even in daylight, the lush woodland behind his garden seemed tangled and dark. Only a short hallway separated us from the sliding glass door leading to the backyard, which was located in the den, the lower level of the home. Mark, Alex's father, slept in the master bedroom upstairs. For the night, the den was our reign. Snacks, a stack of scary films we were not allowed to watch, sleeping bags, and a GameCube. Around 9 o'clock, the rain had begun to fall. By 10 o'clock, the rain had reduced to a fine, lingering fog. By 11 o'clock, the sky had turned a bruised purple, punctuated sometimes by silent lightning strikes. The first knock came at that moment. When that occurred, we were in the middle of a boss encounter. 3 firm, purposeful knocks on the sliding glass door behind us. Alex put the game on hold. He questioned, "You hear that?" He spoke softly. I gave a nod. Yes. Was that outdoors? Had to be. Neither of us made a quick move. We were unable to see anything outside because the blinds were drawn. Already, my heart was beating faster. Already, my heart was beating faster. Alex said, "I'm going to look," and got up. I said, "Dude, don't," a bit too loudly. He was already grabbing for the cord, though. I leapt from the couch and turned off the lamp and the television. The den turned dark. Even with the shutters drawn, The night outside appeared a little brighter than the inside, like camera flashes through smoke. The fog was occasionally illuminated by lightning. Slowly, Alex pulled the blinds open. The only things visible were the gleam of damp grass and our own terror reflected in the glass. It was some minutes before we spoke. We simply sat in the dark, looking at the door as though it might make sense to wait. After a while, we switched the game and the lights back on. We tried to tell ourselves it was nothing, but I kept sneaking peeks at the window. Perhaps a squirrel, a branch, or the wind. I even harbored the hope that Mark was pulling a practical joke, even though I was aware that he was the most distant object from the light-hearted kind. When it occurred again, it must have been almost midnight. It wasn't subtle this time. Knock, knock. We stopped. 3 louder than usual knocks. They felt heavier and more deliberate this time. Both of us turned to face the door. We could only see our own reflection in the glass when the interior lights were on. The yard was then illuminated by lightning, and for the tiniest moment, I saw the man standing motionless near the glass, soaked, wearing what appeared to be a thick boots and a black sweater. His countenance, even though my vision was blurry, I knew he was observing us. We ran. I was halfway to the stairs when Alex almost stumbled over the coffee table. We dashed to his father's room and threw open the door, and essentially pulled him from his bed. Mark was not a nervous person. He reached under his bed for a baseball bat and a flashlight, even though he was still dazed and confused. After putting on our shoes, we followed him out into the backyard. When the porch light turned on, all that was visible were puddles and bending grass. Alex then pointed, though. Footprints, he announced. We followed them across the yard toward the tree line, but they faded just before the edge of the woods. The mud became harder to trace, and soon there was nothing, no one, no sound, just mist, trees, and the distant rumble of thunder. There were heavy boot prints in the mud, deep, fresh, leading up to the sliding door and then curving away. This time, we left the TV off and lay down in our sleeping bags, wide-eyed, while Mark examined the home and locked everything again, telling us to stay in the den. Probably just some local messing around, he murmured, but I could tell even he wasn't buying it. I closed the blinds and continued to watch the clock, waiting impatiently for the second knock, which arrived at precisely 12:15. This time, it was softer, but more purposeful, as if the person knew we were listening. We didn't hesitate and went up the stairs before the sound had completely subsided. Mark was awake and dressed this time, and he instructed us to remain in the hallway before running out into the yard by himself. Minutes went by, then more. At last, he returned wet and shaking his head. Nobody, he said. I even went around the field, the woods, and the front, but nothing. He called the police, who showed up 20 minutes later. At the end of the cul-de-sac, cruisers were splashing through the puddles. They checked the perimeter, collected statements, and informed us what we already knew. They were unable to do anything because they found no evidence of forced entry or known threats. One officer speculated that it might have been a neighbor playing about. Mark said, "Not funny. My son is scared." We stayed up all night. Mark slept with us in the den's recliner, the bat resting on his lap. Nothing more occurred, no more knocks, but I never went back to Alex's house, not once. We continued to discuss that night occasionally years later, and Alex would laugh it off. You recall that strange sleepover that took place on a rainy night, but I could see by the look in his eyes that he hadn't truly forgotten it, wasn't just the knocking. And worst of all, that same week, after I told my mom I didn't want to go back to Alex's, I looked out my bedroom window late one night. We lived almost 8 miles away from Alex, and I thought I saw a figure across the street, standing there. It was the timing, the certainty, the way the prints led nowhere, the way that man, if he was a man, stood motionless in that lightning flash like he was waiting for us to see him. We weren't exactly best friends, but rather the kind of friends you'd call summer break friends, the kind that just kind of click when school is out and time stretches long enough to fill with bike rides, soda-fueled sleepovers, and foolish dares. And I was 12 when I spent my first and last night at Riley Martin's house between the trees, facing our house, and then another flash of lightning, and he was gone. We met at a community pool. The Riley's family didn't travel far, just a few hours south from Lexington down to some rural town I'd never heard of called White Hollow. His mom said it was for quiet and space, but Riley told me it was mostly because his dad got laid off and couldn't afford the city anymore. The year before, started talking over pool noodles and shared boredom, and ended up hanging out every few weekends until he moved away the following spring. By July, I'd pleaded with my mother to let me visit him, but she refused 3 times before finally agreeing. We drove out early on Friday morning, winding through roads that looked more like afterthoughts than highways, and by the time we pulled into his gravel driveway, I was sweating through my shirt and holding a bag of snacks I had packed for the weekend. Even though it was 86 outside, Riley was waiting on the porch, wearing a beat-up hoodie. He offered me a side hug and remarked, "You made it," as though nothing had changed, but his eyes were a little sunken, as if he hadn't slept well lately. He was serious. The house, the 2-story fixer-upper, with wood siding that had turned silver from grey, was on the edge of a forested property with no other structures in sight. The porch creaked as if it hadn't been touched since the 1970s. "Dude," I murmured, taking a step back to appreciate the size of the house. "I'll show you later," he added, lowering his voice. "Yeah, it looks cool, but it's weird at night. We like small scares, horror films, and competing with one another." So I chuckled, assuming he was trying to frighten me. His parents were quiet and kind, and I assumed he was just setting the mood, but I was mistaken. We didn't do much that first day, but I did help him set up the old Xbox in his room, and we played till dinner. His mother was gentler and more ebullient, and she constantly asking whether I needed anything, like socks, mosquito repellent, or an extra pillow, even though I always said no. His father, a thick-set guy with hands like cinder blocks, hardly spoke. Around 11 o'clock that evening, we set up camp in Riley's room with Netflix and snacks. "Hey," I remarked, "do you hear that?" "There it was," he said, muting the television. Pause, scrape, thump. "You guys have a basement." It sounded like it came from below us. Riley went rigid and didn't immediately respond when I asked him, sitting up. "There's like something down there." "I don't know," he said. "We don't have a basement," he murmured. "There's no way to get inside." "What's underneath us?" "My dad says it's probably pipes or animals. We've been hearing noises for a few days." He nodded once, saying, "It doesn't sound like animals." He was staring at the floor as if he could see through it, not at me. After breakfast the following morning, we went outside. There was no real path, just patches of trampled brush. Riley explained as he walked me behind the home, where the grass gave way to dense, tangled woods. It was warm, and the clouds were rolling across the sky as if they couldn't decide what to do. "We're able to go a little farther," he remarked. "Why not?" He hesitated. "Just don't want to get lost." We didn't go far, maybe 200 YD in, when Riley's foot hit something with a metallic thunk. He stumbled and looked down. "What the hell?" he whispered. I followed and saw what he found, he said. Squatting. A rusty cellar door that is partially covered with leaves and moss. No lock, old iron hinges. I backed up and said, "Dude, this is straight up Blair Witch." He ran his palm down the handle and added, "I didn't know this was here." He laughed, but he was pale. Nevertheless, he dragged the door open, and underneath it, a square shaft plunged into complete darkness, and a narrow ladder ran down the side, half-rotted. The door screamed like a wounded animal, the metal straining with every inch. Riley grabbed his foam flashlight, and although the beam barely made it through the darkness, we saw enough. A dirt floor, shattered glass glinting, something mechanical resting against the far wall. The smell hit us instantly. Earth, rot, and something chemical. A caught shells, then a clink. Something moved, and we froze. "This time, it's closer," I muttered. "It sounds like metal dragging on concrete." He nodded, his eyes wild, and we heard hands on the rungs, someone climbing. We raced, but I can't recall half the run back, just branches flying. We have to leave. Riley's dad was working in the garage when we arrived, and when he saw our faces, he dropped what he was holding. Is someone down there? My arms and lungs are burning. Under the yard, Riley yelled. His father trailed us, silently. He halted when he saw the door. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I believe this to be closed. Now he turned to face us inside. After about 10 seconds of argument, he yelled at us in a tone that made compromise impossible. Halfway through the house, Riley's mother greeted us with alarm. She said, "What's going on? Call Frank and Leon." His father instructed her, "Tell them I need them now." 2 men showed up half an hour later. One younger, one elder. They had tall belts, heavy-duty flashlights, and what appeared to be a crowbar. The 3 of them went down into the cellar, and Riley and I were told to remain inside the home. We waited. 10 minutes went by, then 20. When none of them spoke when they returned, Riley's father had a tight jaw and was pallid. Frank seems to have seen a ghost. The 3rd man refused to enter the house. After dragging Riley's mother into the kitchen, they shut the door. I heard muttering followed by sobbing. After an hour, 2 police cars arrived. Riley and I were escorted into his room and instructed not to leave. A white sheet being removed from a police car was the last thing I saw before the door closed. It was years before I heard from Riley again. He ceased answering texts. Once more, they moved, disappeared. Really, he didn't message me till I was 17 years old. Riley, I believe you should know, even though I wasn't meant to. Me, no. What? Riley, down there, my dad discovered 3 full body bags. Me? You're kidding. Riley, I hope. The older ones were sealed. Bodies were being concealed by whoever resided down there. There are beer bottles everywhere. The smell of weeds. There were blood stains in the corner. Me. Was the man? Are you still alive down there? Riley, they believe so. Whoever was ascending at the time when the adults went down. They weren't there when we ran. Me, Riley, holy SH. We weren't listening to pipes. We could hear him. I don't give it much thought. Yet I recall how the door would scream when it opened, often in the middle of the night. I recall hearing hands on the ladder. I also wonder what may have happened if we had waited an additional 30 seconds.